I have something I want to show too. We're putting this up here for the camera, and I'll bring it down for you too. This is my award because we did have at Computer History Museum a contest with Galaxy Game, and the participants were a Steve Russell and a Nolan Bushnell and a William Pitts, and the grand champion was Bill Pitts. Hugh, you go first.
Hi, my name is Hugh Tuck. I went to college at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo, and I graduated in mechanical engineering. I grew up in a city called Hillsborough, California. Went to a high school called Sarah High School, which was a Catholic high school in San Mateo. And if you have any other questions, I'll answer them. Bill?
So my father was in the Air Force, and we traveled every 2 or 3 years. We traveled to another part of the world. I lived in Puerto Rico. I lived in Japan. When I was 2 years old, I was down in Kwajalein Island, and I was born in Honolulu, Hawaii. I met Hugh in high school. We both went to Sarah High School, the Catholic boys' school in San Mateo. I went to Stanford, and 2 years in, my hobby at Stanford was breaking into buildings. And back then it wasn't a criminal activity, it's what normal males did at that time. Now it's a criminal activity. And I went up to the Stanford DC Powers Lab out in the foothills of Stanford campus to break into a building, and it was very disappointing because all the doors were open. The lights were on at 11 o'clock at night. It was the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Project, and it had just started. So I hung around there for my last 2 years and spent my nights literally with a large computer that filled a huge room, and many nights I had the whole machine to myself, and I stopped going to classes, and I prepared myself in such a manner that going to graduate school was not a possibility. And during that time, Hugh and I stayed in contact, and I brought him down and showed him this incredible game on the computer at the AI lab, and it was called Space War. And Hugh said to me, wow, if we could make a coin-operated version of this, we could get rich. So many years later, I gave him a call and said, DEC is now building a PDP-11 computer, and we can get rich. There's some background.
I was just a boy, we played with little toy cars, and I built tree forts, and I liked to climb ropes, and just a regular old little boy. I did like math, but there was nothing unusual about my boyhood.
When I was growing up, I was very much involved in building things, model airplanes in particular, and my brother and I were both very much into archery, and there was a sporting goods store where you could buy just the arrow shaft and the feathers, and so after we got into it a bit, we built all of our arrows, and I still have most of them. Haven't shot them in a while, but they're keepsakes. But basically, I enjoyed building things. I played board games, and
They had pinball machines back then. You know what a pinball machine is, right? Is that what they call it? All right.
Hugh's brother had a pinball machine called Sweethearts, and we played that a lot. And the nice thing about that is we disabled the tilt mechanism, and we put 2x4 under the front legs, so we could really run up the score high. We were great players once we cheated.
Bill was always more coordinated than me. Plus, he had a lot more time to waste, so he spent more time practicing. I can't remember having any heroes as a child. No, I don't remember.
No, I certainly had heroes. I had John Wayne, Robert Mitchum, and later Arnold Schwarzenegger as the Barbarian.
Oh, my favorite magazine was Mad Magazine. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it was I'm not sure what you call Mad Magazine. It was sort of a comic book that had a lot of satire in it and cartoons. It was, I think it's still published.
I don't know about magazines so much. I read many science fiction books. And later when I was in college, I started subscribing to a magazine, Aviation Week. So I've always been kind of interested in science and science fiction and things.
I took some computer classes at Cal Poly, and that's when you used punch cards, and you had to compile the punch cards on an IBM computer. It was run in Fortran, and you would sit there and write your program, and then you'd run it through the computer. You'd put the cards through the computer, and then it would say you made an error, and then you'd take the cards out and fix the error, and you'd put them back in again, and the computer would tell you you made another error, and it would, you go through that process. So that was my only computer training, but I did love computers. I especially, well, actually, I'll tell you a quick story. When I was at Cal Poly, they had a machine. There was no computers. There was a machine called the Marchant calculator, and it was a mechanical calculator that could actually do multiplication. And you would punch into the keyboard like 999, and you go times 876, and the machine would sit there and it would go clunk, 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 clunk. And eventually it would go clunk, 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 and it would give you the answer on the keyboard. And about my junior year, they came in, it was the machine, it was called I think it was the Singer calculator. It was a desk-sized computer with a screen, and you could actually type in 999 times 888 or whatever, and within 2 seconds, it would give you the answer on the screen. And I thought that was just amazing.
Before I started at Stanford, you meet your faculty advisor, and mine was James Angel in the Double E department. And he asked me what my interests were, and he said, and I had mentioned computers, but I guess I mentioned computers. I really didn't know what one was, other than what you would read in or see on TV. But he suggested that normally all students take Introduction to Western Civilization in their first year, but that I could put that off for a year and take Introduction to Computer Science. And so I did that, and I found, and we learned to program in alcohol. And I found it absolutely wonderful that there was a way that it was pure logic. To me, it was very simple, because it was just logic. And so that led to taking one course after another. And then 2 years later, I stumbled across the AI project just as it was getting started. At Stanford, I hung around when I got there, when I found the Stanford AI project, I was hanging around and trying to get computer time. But that was a facility for graduate students, and I was an undergraduate. And the executive director of the lab, Les Ernest, I've always appreciated this about him. The ruling he made was, this is a facility for graduate students, but you are a student, so you can't sign up for resources. And at this time you had to sign up. You would sign up for so much. This was a PDP-6 time sharing system, one of the very first commercially viable time sharing systems, and there would be 8 to 10 people on the machine at a time. You'd sign up for so much core memory. You'd sign up for a deck tape. There were no disk drives then, a deck tape. And you would sign up for 1 or 2 of those, and then for a teletype. And so when you signed up for all those resources, that's what you could use for for 1 or 2 hours, whatever you signed up. So his ruling was I couldn't sign up, but if any resources weren't being used, I could use them, which is why I ended up spending lots of time at night up there. A year later, though, I got a job working with Arthur Samuel. Arthur Samuel was a IBM fellow, retired, and what he had done at IBM is he had written the first checker playing program. And they used that program as the diagnostic test program on the manufacturing floor at IBM in the late 50s to check out their 709 computers. And the 709 was based on vacuum tubes. They were huge machines. Anyway, when he came over to the Stanford AI project, he wanted to reprogram that to run on the DEC PDP-6. And so I was his helper on that, and I did most of the coding. But I was taking his program from the IBM 709, and later it ran on the 7090 and 7094, which were a little bit more modern transistor-based machines. So for the next year, that's what I was doing, was working on the checker playing program, which was very interesting. When I was at Stanford, probably my second year, I had heard about this incredible game called Space War, and at that time it was running on a PDP-1 computer that was run by this for computer learning program for grade school students. And at nighttime they had Space War running, so I went down and played it there. And then a couple of years later, at one night, 3 fellows at the Stanford AI lab, Phil Pettit, Dave Poole, and Bill Weir, the 3 of them in one night rewrote Space War. Space War was originally written by Steve Russell. It ran on a PDP-1 or maybe a TX something or other at MIT, and that was probably 2 or 3 years earlier. And I'm pretty sure that would be the first video game. So it was re-implemented on, and every time you re-implement to a different architecture, you have to recode it again. So they did that very quickly one night. Basically, they're good programmers and they knew what they were doing. And so then it was very much available. I could play it whenever I wanted to, and I showed it to Hugh, and Hugh made his fateful statement that has cost us dearly.
Yeah, Bill, he had been telling me about this game, and so he said, come on, I'll sneak you in one night. So we went up there, I don't know, it was 11 o'clock at night, and Bill, we walked into the building and we looked left and right. It was an amazing building because there was somebody working on the first mechanical arm there, you know, in one room. And in the next room, there was somebody working on voice recognition. You know, this was all brand new technology. And then in this other room was the Space War game, which was, you have to remember, there was no Pac-Man, no Pong, nothing. There was no games. It was pinball machines or Monopoly. That was it. So there was this display, and that you could see the two little spaceships, and it had real gravity, and all the rules of physics applied. As the spaceship went around the sun, they would move, and you could shoot darts at each other, and if you hit them, the machine, it was just amazing. And there was nothing like it at all. So that's when I made the statement, boy, if we could market this, we'd be rich, which half of that statement was correct, just not the rich part.
At the AI lab, when I first showed up there, the fellow that was in charge of the keeping the machine running was Steve Russell. He had come over from MIT, and he was at the AI lab, and he was a very enjoyable fellow to be around. So Hugh and his brothers and sisters came up with the money to build the first version of Space War. And
I interrupt that in the interim, they came out with a new machine called the PDP-11, which was one of the first mini computers.
Yeah.
And when they came out with that, Bill came to me and said, "Hey Hugh, they just came out with this PDP-11, and I think I can program Space War to run on the PDP-11." So I will let you continue at that point.
So Hugh put up some money and his brothers and sisters and the first system cost $20,000. And we knew it would cost about that because the price list for all the components pretty much let you know what it would cost. I have never claimed anything more than the title of I'm the one that put coin acceptors on Space War.
And joysticks.
And the reason that Galaxy Game got the name Galaxy Game is when we were finishing the first version and it was going to go on to the Stanford campus. At the same time, we had a lot of anti-war sentiment on campus to the point that at nighttime, large groups of people were moving through campus and throwing rocks at windows and breaking windows and things. So Hugh's sister Terry, we decided that Space War would not be a good name for what we were building because the claim would be that we're just taking war into space. So we're sitting around the dinner table at Hugh's family's house, and his sister comes up. We're all trying to come up with what's a name that's not going to be Space War. And his sister Terry came up with the name Galaxy Game. And that seemed like a fairly innocuous, friendly game, so that's where the name came from. The other thing is on the first version of Galaxy Game and then enhanced, the second version was a reprogramming again, but both versions took the standard Space War that was on the PDP-6, and my goal was to deliver the full game in all of its glory. Now, when you were playing on the PDP-6, you could go in with a debugging program called DDT, and you could change the gravity component or the initial torpedo velocity. You could change various parameters and change the playing characteristics of the game. So in my coin-operated version, I made that be available as a very easy user option of just flipping switches and later pushing buttons to select various parameters of the game. When the game starts, there is a sun in the center of the screen, and then there are two spaceships, and they're up in two corners of the screen. And if you do nothing when the game starts, if you don't do anything to your ships, they will both start slowly moving towards the sun because there's gravity and they're going to be pulled in, and when they hit the sun, they're going to explode and be gone. The user controls are that you can rotate right or left, and you can accelerate, and you can fire torpedoes. And you have another button where you can jump into hyperspace, but we won't talk about hyperspace. That complicates things a little bit. But So the game is you just maneuver your ship around. Once you start going forward, the only way to slow down is you have to turn your ship around and now accelerate in the other direction and come to a stop. The playing characteristics are such that it actually makes a very engaging game, that you're fighting this other guy who you know is an alien from a different galaxy and you must kill him to save your planet. It's a very simple game. You can learn it. You literally don't need instructions. You can just play with it, and within 2 minutes you understand how to play it. And it was very popular. People, when they saw that game, just would come back and use it more and more. When we installed the second version of Galaxy Game, which is the one in the blue fiberglass cases, and there were 2 of them being driven by the PDP-11, you could start a 4-player game. And that actually turned out to be the standard use. What happened at the student union, the coffee house at Stanford, is on Friday and Saturday nights in particular, there would be large crowds of people that would come play the machine, and there was a standard game they played. It was positive gravity of some flavor. I don't remember that, but initial torpedo velocity 3 and ship acceleration 3, which meant it was a very reflexive game. It was fast. And the rules were that when you came and you wanted to play, you would put your quarter on top of the machine, and there would be a line of quarters. Those are the people waiting to play. And when you put your quarter in, you've got 3 games. And as long as you were the winner and you still had some fuel left, or some torpedoes, something like that, you got a free game. So the idea is you would sit down and you would play the game as long as you could play, but when your 3 games were up, you had to go to the back of the line again. And that got to be the mode that the machine was really using. It was kind of a consensus. This is the way you play the machine. We had students piled around the machine, standing on chairs, trying to see what was going on. There was just tremendous enthusiasm, and the coin acceptors, we had put on regular size coin acceptors that we bought from the same place that we bought the coin acceptors. And we discovered that they were way too small, and so we got 1-gallon plastic milk cartons, and we had 2 of those in there for the first machine, and they would fill up every week. And somewhere in there, the plan was always that we would get the marketing data that we needed to figure out how cheap do we need to make these machines so we could really make money. That was our master plan. But Hugh forgot the master plan when he saw the great, actually we both forgot the master plan. I suggested that, okay, let's build version 2 and we'll make it a whole lot cheaper because we'll use that computer to drive. We built a display processor so it could drive 4 consoles, but we ever only used it to drive 2. And the second machine was far more expensive than the first, and by the time we're done, we'd spent $60,000 building these 2 systems.
That's $60,1972, which is
$300,000 today, probably. So anyway, we forgot our master plan and we built more. And shortly after that machine was installed, I went to Hugh and his brothers and sisters, told them, I will run this thing and you'll get your principal back, but that'll probably be it.
So he paid us back over, 5 years, a quarter at a time. So what's 4 times 60,000? 240,000 quarters. And the problem was it ran off of paper tape. So every 2 or 3 weeks, the computer would crash. So he'd have to go down there open up the computer, put the paper tape reader in, run the paper tape through it, reload the program, and start it up again.
Not quite
But,
that bad. It
yeah.
actually went very long periods of time without needing to be reloaded, but it did need it from time to time.
Actually, somewhere in the interim there, we went and talked to Chicago Coin. Now, Chicago Coin was the biggest manufacturer of pinball machines. And we told them we had this new idea, which, you know, to executives of a pinball company, they had no concept of what it was. And they said, well, how much would you charge? We said 25 cents a game. They said, nobody will pay 25 cents a game to play a game. A dime is what they pay, and they're not going to pay 25 cents. And they pretty much brushed us off. So they probably lost out on the best opportunity of their life. But such is business.
I would say the key moment was Hugh saying, if we could make a coin-operated version, we could get rich. So from my standpoint, what I did was I could read the code that was running on the PDP-6 and get the algorithms there and recode it for a PDP-11. That's all pretty straightforward. So in terms of actually coming up with the concept and building the game, that all goes to Steve Russell and Pete Sampson and whoever else contributed in that effort.
Who built the display processor?
Oh yeah, so we did need to build a display processor for Galaxy Game. For the first version, it was very simple, and it was just a point plotter that you would load an X and Y register, and when you loaded the one of the registers, it would intensify it would move the beam to that coordinate and then intensify it. And so you literally are drawing the spaceship by just drawing a bunch of points. To drive multiple consoles, the second version had a display processor that could automatically draw vectors and characters. And that was designed by Ted Panofsky. Ted's father was the head of SLAC and the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center on campus. And Wolfgang Panofsky. And Ted had never went to college. He was a very bright kid. And as a teenager, he got a job at the AI lab. And he was the main person that did maintenance on the machine and kept everything running. And so when I needed a display processor, I went to Ted and he said, yeah, he could design it. He did, and it was a very good display processor. We built it. Hugh and I were living on the top floor of a building in Palo Alto, a 3-story building. And there was this stairs that went up, and the top floor had been an attic, but a number of fellows going to Stanford that were on the Stanford crew, that's where you do the rowing on a boat, crew members for many, many years, 10 or 15 years, they had been living in, 4 of them, in this, what they called the penthouse. And at the end of my 4 years at Stanford, somehow I moved into the penthouse. I was not on the crew, but I moved into the penthouse, and later Hugh moved in for. Actually, you weren't living there then.
I don't know where I was at that point.
But anyway, everything that had to be carried up and down these stairs. The computer weighed probably 80 pounds, but the fiberglass cases, which are very large, we had to squeeze them to get them in the door frame. All of that stuff went up and down the stairs many times. When I was doing the game development, when I ran the computer up in the top floor, the power supply put so much noise on the power lines that it wiped out the TVs in our building and probably the surrounding buildings. And I tried to do the work more in the afternoons. But very quickly, other people in the building, they figured out why their TVs weren't working. And so I really did have to try and do it not during prime TV time. Yeah, the first machine, as it was getting close to being done, we took it up to Hugh's house, parents' house in Hillsboro. And we had it running there, and everybody was playing with it. Meanwhile, we were still finishing some of the work on it.
I had a thought. When we bought the equipment, the memory, there's 10 kilobytes of memory, and the memory cost $3,000 just for the 10 kilobytes. Now that's not gigabytes.
It was 8.
8 kilobytes. That's not gigabytes. That's not megabytes. It's kilobytes. $3,000 for an iron core memory. Crazy.
Remember, this was the early 70s. It was the birth of flower children. And I'm proud to say I am a flower child. Which meant that sometimes when I was towards the end of developing the game, I smoked a little pot. And it was amazing. It was kind of like you're looking at this screen in these spaceships, and you realize that inside there is a whole world. It's a complete world. And so anyway, in my higher moments, I just very much enjoyed playing the game with a different perspective.
You can edit that part out.
Whatever.
I'm not sure where pot is in Italy, so.
I bet you they have pot in Italy.
I don't think we overcame the challenge. The challenge was making a much less expensive machine. My father had advised me to go back to Digital Equipment Company and tell them that we wouldn't pay $10,000 for the machine, that we would only pay $1,000 for the machine. And we never did ask Digital because I thought my dad was insane. But you know, if we'd gone to Digital and said we were going to buy 100 machines at $1,000, they might have listened to us. I don't know. But there was no such thing as a venture capital back then, was there?
It was just starting to take off.
Yeah, we didn't understand business. We didn't understand venture capital. We were just a couple of geeks making this really fantastic machine.
The challenge was a business challenge. The technology was reasonably straightforward, given that you could buy the computer and it worked. Yeah, Steve Russell was from there. I'm sure, and a number of other people at the AI lab, including John McCarthy, who was the fellow that was actually funded by DARPA. He was a professor of computer science at Stanford, and he had come over from MIT. What happens with American universities and grant money is if you're a principal researcher and you get some grant money and you're at one university, you can move and take that project and that money with you to another university, and that makes you very attractive in terms of the new university. They try and hire the people that have the grant money and everything. Now, I've told you as much as I know about that because that's not my field and I haven't done it. But I know my son is over at the University of Hawaii, and he is applying for grant money, and so I just know from him that if you get grant money, you can move and take it with you. And I'm assuming it was that way back in 1970 also. I'll let you take that one.
Well, I'll let you. Initially, I think in the first 3 or 4 days, it really people didn't know what it was in the corner of the student union. And I don't think people knew. But then, Bill, I think you told me he came back a week later and then he saw these crowds that he had described earlier. And we thought, well, everybody likes the idea.
Yeah, no, we were very pleased with the response that it got, but I would also say that I kind of expected that response, because everybody who had seen Space War on whatever machine it was running at that time was very excited by it. Originally, Space War was only available to system programmers and in the midnight hours, 2 and 3 in the morning, because these machines back then, they were billed out at $600 an hour. They were very expensive, but you never turned them off. So the only time you could really use them as a toy would be in the midnight hours when they're not doing anything else. Here, this is an interesting one. There was a fellow that his father had come to the university, and he was in high school, or might have even been an 8th grader. His name was Jonathan Rosenberg. And I made a deal with him that if he would come over, he and his brother would ride their bikes over and clean the machines. I don't know how often, but regularly, that they could get free plays. And so he got lots of free plays. He became the best player there on the weekend nights when everybody was around there. He would go play, and he would often, once he sat down, he'd stay in there in the chair for a very long time because he was very good. About 20 years ago, and I totally forgot him and forgot that situation. But about 20 years ago, I got a FedEx package, and it was a blog posting, nicely printed, by Jonathan Rosenberg. And he was now a VP at Google. And he was just telling the troops there that when he was younger, he played Galaxy Game. And one of the maneuvers in Galaxy Game was that you could, if you were heading towards your opponent, pointing towards him, you could pop into hyperspace and accelerate, because you had 4 times the acceleration in hyperspace. But in hyperspace, you can't see your ship, it disappears. So you would pop into hyperspace, and you get much closer to your opponent, pop out of hyperspace and shoot him. And he said that was a big risk, because going in and out of hyperspace took up a quarter of your initial load of fuel. So it was very risky, but sometimes you got the big reward. And his message was to the troops that sometimes you have to take a risk to get the big reward. So he sends me his blog posting with a little post-it on it, "Do you remember me?" And the truth was, at that time, I didn't remember him, but I was not going to waste this opportunity. So I sent him an email back saying, "Of course I remember you. And oh, by the way, Galaxy Game needs to be saved." Because Galaxy Game had been over at the Computer History Museum, and they had put it on static display for 6 years after Ted Panofsky and I had gotten it running after it had been not running for 20 years. We'd gotten it running again. We used it over there a while. Then they put it on static display when they moved to their new facility. And I had on numerous occasions said, "Hey, the machine needs to be running," but I didn't get any response. So I tell Jonathan that Galaxy Games needs to be saved. I know Google donates lots of money to the Computer History Museum, so it's got some clout. So I said, "Help me free the machine. I'll get it running again. We'll put it over at Google." And sure enough, we popped the machine free. Ted and I spent another month or 2 getting it running again. This machine does not like to sit and not be used. And so we put it over at Google, and it was there for a year or 2, and got a lot of play there. And we had some big contests. And Jonathan beat everyone, still good. Of course, he practiced a lot. You have to play it frequently to stay good. He beat everyone, and so I come in at the end to challenge him, and he totally toasted me too. But I hadn't spent lots of time coming up to speed again. But and then later, as kind of a thank you, we used to have a big balloon, like the Goodyear balloon, that was flying out of Moffett Field, and it would take people on tours around the bay. It was privately owned. And as a thank you, Jonathan arranged for Google to get the blimp for me. And we had the whole thing for an afternoon.
That was cool.
And I got all of the people that had helped with Galaxy Game over the years and my family members, and we had a very nice cruise over the bay for 4 hours. There weren't other developers. I mean, I can tell you one thing, yes. So when we were in the final stages of developing the first version, we got a notice somehow, I forget how we got it, but from Nolan Bushnell. Nolan Bushnell had also been going up to the Stanford AI project. He had also seen Space War, and so he was also building a, quote, Space War. But the difference is he was building something that could be manufactured for under $1,000. And he knew that we were building something that was going to cost substantially more because we're using a PDP-11. So he wanted to warn us, hey guys, I know you're spending lots of money on this, but look what I'm doing. So we went over to Nunning Associates, which is where he was developing this machine. And I was very impressed when we went in. He was standing next to one of the original computer space mummy cases that he was in, and it was open in the back, and he was standing there with an oscilloscope probe in his hand. And at that time, I was always very impressed with somebody who had an oscilloscope probe in his hand. Nolan did hardware design, and I did software design. Later I did learn how to and pick up hardware skills, but not at that time. Anyway, I remember Nolan as a very nice fellow and just giving us a clue. And his game was playable at that time too, so we saw it, and I was amazed at that he could build it, the whole unit, for under $1,000, but it was nowhere close to Space War. It was a totally different game with very poor playing characteristics. And in fact, when it went out into the field, that was the judgment of the operators. A lot of the operators that bought these first machines did not make any money off of that game. But Nolan's next game, Pong, was quite a success. But Nolan has always been a good guy. Sure. Steve, at the AI lab, the machine would sometimes be taken down, or it would still be running, but it was not for user access. They were running diagnostics and things to find problems in the machine and to repair it. And sometimes when doing this, and I remember in particular, there was one where a particular light on the front panel wasn't coming on. And I had seen them go into the back, and they had banged on some boards and reseated them, and the light came back on. And now I am probably in my first year of being up at the AI lab, and I know very little about computers at that point, but I had seen them open up the back and bang on these boards. So one time I'm up there, and there are a number of people working on the machine doing their research and whatever they're doing, and this light goes off. So I open the back of the machine and I bang on the boards, and the whole machine comes down. And Steve Russell was in the area, And he goes, absolutely apoplectic. He is a demon released. He is so upset and he is screaming. I've never seen anybody so angry in my life. And so anyway, I've just, I like, Steve is a wonderful fellow. I see him occasionally. We like each other. And I bring up that, I remind him of that occasion from time to time. Actually, no. It's kind of interesting to me that I was when I was playing Galaxy game, I was the best player because I knew tricks and I knew things and I played it a lot. That's very important. I never really played other games, but many years later, I would go into game arcades and I'd stand there and I'd look at the various games, and they're so much more sophisticated and complicated. You know, Space War is something that one person can do in a month or two, reprogram or something. It took us, by the time you do all the other stuff of display processor and joysticks, maybe it's 3 or 4 months. But it's a relatively small project. The video games today, they have, 50, 100 people working on the game, and they're extremely sophisticated. So I like to see where the art and the technology is, but to be good at any of those games takes a real investment of time. And I haven't had, you know what, as I get older and go into full retirement mode, maybe I'll get good at playing some of those games, but I've never been a game player.
Yeah, I never played them either. One of the problems was Space War was so good, and then the next game that came out, Pong, was, we think people are paying money for this? It's just like bing, bing,
No,
so I never got into games either, and now I'm just like Bill. You look at these games and they're fantastic. It's amazing that people look like people, and it's unbelievable what's happened, but way behind us, or at least way behind me. At some point we realized it just wasn't going to make any money. It was too small a return on investment. So,
well, because we went broke on that. But also, certainly building games to me is the most enjoyable way to program, especially when you have a display, because you do some programming and you immediately get a visual response on what you've done, and so that's very enjoyable. But my career path went down the path of full text retrieval and distributed file systems, and I've really been very focused on that, and in many ways that's also extremely rewarding. There are very difficult problems there, but if you solve them, there's a lot of value also. The rewarding thing to me is this number one, working with Hugh and then Ted Panofsky. I just enjoyed the relationships, and to give you I'm going to give you the history of the machine since we shut it down at Tressiter. So it ran at Tressiter from 1972 through 1979, and as it got older, the display processor became more and more unreliable because the sockets we used were made by Texas Instruments, and they were early sockets that you would plug the dip chips into, the integrated circuits, and they weren't reliable. And so I would literally be bending the boards to where with shims and things to where everything was working, and that had to be changed all the time. So it got worse and worse to finally it was just we'd gotten all the principal back to pay off everybody mostly, and it was time to shut it down. So the pieces come back and fiberglass cases are under a Monterey pine tree that's dripping sap on them. And the power supplies are out in a metal shed with moisture. Anyway, pieces are lying around for 20 years. And then I decided, you know what, it's time to get it working again. So I called up Ted Panofsky. Hadn't talked to him in probably several years, and said, Ted, I want to get Galaxy Game running again. We need to build a new display processor using your original design, but we're going to build a new one using good sockets. And I want you to do it. Would you do that? And of course, I'm not going to pay you anything. And he said, sure. So we worked on that. It took 3 months, and we got the machine running again. And it was here at my house in Los Altos, and we had a big party, and everybody that was associated with Galaxy Game before we all had it came over and had a good time, and we played the game. And then throughout the years since then, whenever the machine breaks, and particularly what's unreliable now is the tubes the display tubes are made by Hewlett Packard, and they haven't made any of those in a long time. It's old technology, and when they break, that's analog circuitry that needs to be fixed. I do digital, but I don't understand the analog. So I give Ted a call, and he always comes over, and we get him running again. And so Ted has been in fact, the reason why the games have been able to be kept running. So I would say that just the relationships of the people you work with on doing something that's kind of fun. This is advice that you probably hear from lots of people, is just do what you really enjoy doing, that's all.
Same thing I was going to say. I just saw a movie on a lot of successful people, and usually they're all people that are just driven by a dream, and they're not really going after the money. They're just trying to follow their dream about some idea they have, and that, I think, would be the best advice. You just find something you like to do and do it.
It's probably harder for developers today, because when we're doing it, I could do it on my own. And now, if you want to develop games, it's pretty hard to develop any. I can't imagine a game that would be competitive in today's environment that you could go do on your own. You'd instead need to go work for some company and do some piece of it. But that can be very enjoyable too.
Hello, video game party friends. Have fun. I hope you enjoyed our video, and I hope it inspired you to do great things in the future.
And I can't top that. Well done, Hugh.
I will say one other thing. For the past 20 years, Bill's been working on a program for 20 years. I don't know how many lines of code it is, 10,000 lines. And it's a file distribution system that is completely different than anything that else is on the market. And it's at least 10 times faster than any other method of transmitting large files across long distances. And just in case anybody out there is interested in talking to Bill about this, give him a call.
I have something I want to show too. We're putting this up here for the camera, and I'll bring it down for you too. This is my award because we did have at Computer History Museum a contest with Galaxy Game, and the participants were a Steve Russell and a Nolan Bushnell and a William Pitts, and the grand champion was Bill Pitts.
You beat Steve Russell, okay.
Well, they hadn't played in a long time. I had a huge advantage.